So the handout that you have says session 31 and 32 because I already know it's going to take 2 sessions to get through these 8 points. And anytime I start a new area of eschatology, because, eschatology, the study of the end times, is the overall subject, but we're breaking it down into segments, smaller chunks, so that we might put the pieces of the puzzle together properly. And this particular subject, I was at a disadvantage, even though you look at the individual parts and it doesn't look that complicated. Pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about each of these 8 over the 2 sessions. But I was a bit of a disadvantage because I really don't. I've taught on some of these subjects, but I've never thought of the overall subject. What are the main purposes of the Great Tribulation? We had a few sessions on, we put the events during that last 7 years on a timeline, like the abomination of desolation, the mark of the beast, and all the major events, we put them along a timeline. So we've done the what. But what I'm trying to deal with on this one is the why. And I've never really quite thought about it this way. I've never developed and taught on this exact subject. I've never heard anyone teach on this exact subject. A lot of us have taught on the different events, maybe their time order and all of that, but that's the what. I'm thinking about the why. In other words, why did God separate that last 70th week, that last 7 years? Why did he separate it from the previous 69? Why did he decide, I'm going to reserve this period of 7 years, this final 70th week, I'm going to move it ahead thousands of years, and it's going to be the 7 years that leads up to the return of Christ. So why separate it, and what purpose does it serve? What is God trying to accomplish in that last 7 years? So I guess my text verse for these 8 would be Ezekiel 38:23, where he says, "Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself." So as he accomplishes these 8 purposes of the last 7 years, the overall goal or the overall result will be he will be magnified, he will be sanctified, he will be set apart as the only true God. Another way to say that is that I've brought up Genesis 3:15 a lot. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He will bruise your head, you shall bruise his heel. And that we call that the initial gospel prophecy of where everything is headed to from that point on. And so another way to describe the last 7 years is that by the time it's through, Genesis 3:15 will finally be fulfilled. It will be accomplished by the return of Christ. He will crush the head of the serpent. We'll get into a little bit of that tonight. So each new area I get into, and one like this that I've never put together quite like this before, really becomes daunting because I know from experience, okay, I tried to think about what major purposes does he have in the Great Tribulation, and I came up with 8. There's probably more. Maybe you could do it in less. But I like the number 7 or 8. Any of these big subjects that I study regarding prophecy, I often try to break them down into 7 or 8 main points because those are great Bible numbers. They're prophetic numbers. So I chose 8, and these are the 8. But the reason it's daunting is because I know from experience, each one of these 8 are going to take a lot of research time of finding the verses, finding what the Bible says about each of these 8. And then after you do all of the research and the gathering of material, how do you organize it in a way that when you present it, it's understandable, it's orderly, makes sense? And so I've been working on this for quite some time, and I hope that it will end up being a blessing to you. One phrase used often in the book of Ezekiel that ties all 8 purposes together, and I didn't give a particular verse because it's used like 50 times or more. As God goes through the events of the future in the book of Ezekiel, he repeats one phrase over and over: then they shall know that I am the Lord. So by the time we get through the end of the 7 years and Christ comes back, sets up his kingdom, defeats his enemies, rescues his people, everyone, there'll be no atheist at that point. There'll be no skeptics at that point. There'll be no doubters at that point. Even people that will not be saved, even people who remain in their unbelief, will be forced to admit who the real God is, who the Lord is, that there is one, and that he's the one that just did all of this because he came from the sky and a lot of people were killed, and he defeated his main enemy, the Antichrist, and he's now ruling in Jerusalem. And how do you doubt any of that? It's pretty obvious. So God has a point to make, that he is God and no other, that he had a clear plan for his creation, that it will be accomplished through the life, death, resurrection, ascension, return, and reign of his Son, Jesus Christ, the last Adam. And he plans to share that purpose with a glorious bride. So before we get into these 8, another summary statement would simply be, it is for God to vindicate himself, to prove that he is faithful to keep his promises, that he made promises, now I'm keeping them, and no one is able to dispute it. But to reach that final point where he is vindicated in all of his promises, these 8 major purposes must be accomplished. And in doing so, he's going to destroy pride and elevate his Son. So I ask again the question, why did God set apart the last 7 years from the previous 483, or the last week from the previous 69 of Daniel 4:24 through 27? He had a purpose. He has a purpose with that last week of 7 years. And that's what I want to talk about on these 8. And my goal tonight is to get through the first 5. We'll see how that goes. And to what we were talking about, politics and world events, the first one really deals with that. This is a big one. This is one I don't hear brought up often. I've tried to bring it up often, just in passing, but dealing with it a little more deeply. One purpose of the Great Tribulation, the last 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel, is to allow the mystery of iniquity to reach its fullness. This carries a lot more importance than most people think. God is a God of mercy. He's long-suffering. He's kind. He loves to forgive, loves his creation. So before God steps in, like in a big and dramatic way and wipes everybody out, he gives a lot of time for people to repent, He wants them to repent. And so even though, how should we say this? Iniquity, the mystery of iniquity, when did it begin? We would probably say it began when Lucifer rebelled in heaven. In Ezekiel 28, verse 15, about Lucifer, it says, "You were perfect in all of your ways until iniquity was found in you." So where was iniquity first found or made manifest? It's when Lucifer rebelled because he didn't like the fact that God chose his son to be co-equal with him and to share in his glory instead of the great light bearer archangel, beautiful in all of his ways, until iniquity was found in him. Why was iniquity found in him? The same way iniquity is found in any of us. Pride. So he was lifted up in pride. The mystery of iniquity began. That particular term, mystery of iniquity, is 2 Thessalonians 2 and 7. And in that passage, Paul says, the mystery of iniquity is already at work. Well, it was already at work ever since the time Lucifer rebelled. It continued to be at work on the earth when Lucifer deceived Eve. She gave Adam to eat, and he ate, and sin entered, and iniquity was found on the earth in human beings. It continued, the principle of it is found in Genesis 15 and 16. When God was preparing Abraham and Sarah to have their promised son, he said, but at some point, I'm going to remove them from this land of promise. That's interesting, huh? He has Abraham in the land of promise. He said, at some point, I'm going to remove them. They're going to go into Egypt, even though he didn't name Egypt in that particular statement, but to a people not of their own. And they will be in servitude. And they're going to be out of this land for 400 years. Why? Because he gives the reason, because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. In other words, I want the iniquity of the people of Canaan land to reach its highest or worst point, because I want to be justified in wiping them out. And it was to happen under Joshua. He didn't do a complete job, but he did a decent job, I guess. He left some of them in the land. So this I'm talking about the mind of God. He wants every chance to be given before he steps in and wipes out a people. And so you bring that all the way through. Remember, he waited in the days of the flood. He waited in Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So again, that idea of he let iniquity reach its full force before he stepped in with the flood and wiped them out. So that's just how God operates. And so one of the main purposes of the last 7 years is to let iniquity reach its full force with Satan and the Antichrist and human beings to justify Jesus coming back and wiping out his enemies. It had reached its fullness with Israel at his first coming, when Pilate said, "What shall I do with your king?" And they said, "We have no king but Caesar." They committed treason against their Messiah. Open apostasy. And Pilate said, "Well, what do you want me to do with him then?" They said, "Crucify him, crucify him. Murder our Messiah." Jesus had said to the Jewish leaders coming to arrest him in Luke 22:53. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. So Jesus said, your house is left unto you desolate. This is what you want. This is what's going to happen. 40 years later, their city and temple were destroyed, and the Jews were scattered to the nations. So I'm saying all that to say that that same spirit of rebellion, of treason, hatred against God, is going to be on a global scale. And is that this beeping?
It's got a flashing red light.
Flashing red light? Is it messing up on me?
Almost it's fine.
Oh, it's fine. Okay.
The wash out.
Oh, okay. It's the drinking fountain beeping, and it needs to be refilled with water, I guess. So what we're experiencing today is a buildup toward the mystery of iniquity must reach its fullest state. That's why all of us are scratching our heads and concluding that what's going on in the world today in our country is out of the realm of human beings. It's demonic. That the principalities and powers have stepped in and have taken control of our national leaders and our world leaders, because it's the goal of Satan through his man Antichrist to have a global government, a mark of the beast, a commercial type of system. And we're finding out every day new information about the purpose for the world leaders, even though it will be received as a good thing by most humans, is digital currency. I mean, that's just on the horizon. It's being put into place. And with this cancel culture that we're living in, conservative Christian people are already being excluded off social media all of the time, as if they don't exist. It's just the next step, because the banks are the leaders of the whole ESG movement, of the whole woke movement. The banks and financial institutions are the leaders in all of it. They're in it at 100%. And so if you don't have a good social score in their mind, at the very least, they'll say, you can't do business with our bank anymore. But with a wicked government behind them, they'll take the next step. Your account is canceled, or at least until you agree to change and agree with what we think you should say and think and write. Your account is on hold. And we see it. We know it's happening. It's picking up speed. All it's going to take, this might tie in with the next election in our country, all it's really going to take is a crisis that will probably be different than COVID. It will be probably more political, economic, some sort of crisis, and probably align with our next presidential election. We can see this building toward that, of the efforts to destroy your opponents at any cost, even if you have to violate the entire Constitution and the legal system. So what? We don't like him, so we're going to do all we can to destroy him. Well, what are you going to do when it comes down to you and they don't like you? See, we can sit back and say, well, there's a lot of things about him I don't like either. Yeah, but does that mean you violate the whole legal system to destroy him? Well, once that line is crossed with somebody that people will not maybe try to stop on a large enough basis for it to stop, then that sets the stage for them to come after anyone they want. And so how this mystery of iniquity reaching its fullness will manifest itself is really what we're just throwing out ideas, we're throwing out possibilities, probabilities. But the mystery of iniquity, there must be a final clash between the mystery of iniquity, 2 Thessalonians 2:7, and the mystery of godliness, 1 Timothy 3:16. And this clash will build throughout the last 7 years, with the mystery of iniquity seemingly winning at times, as it has through history, until heaven opens up and they see Christ on his white horse, and he's going to put a stop to it quickly, suddenly, dramatically, completely, finally. The next one, number 2, to bring the times of the Gentiles, Luke 21:24, to its fullness. So let's just look at that. Luke 21:24. This is Luke's version of Matthew 24. So this is what will be happening during the days leading up to the return of Christ. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So what has happened the last 2,000 years? Jerusalem has been trampled by the Gentiles. And it's going to be trampled by the Gentiles until God says the time of the Gentiles is done. And it's time for my son to set up his kingdom and crush all the Gentile kingdoms. There's another verse that speaks about this. Let's turn to Romans 11:25. So there are, I talk about the famous or the important untils of the Bible. So that Luke 21:24, Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until. So he's going to let it happen until he decides it's time to stop. And when is it time to stop? When he decides the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. In Romans 11:25, he says, I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. It's both the same thing, the times of the Gentiles, the fullness of the Gentiles. And God's going to, like the mystery of iniquity, he's going to let it reach its culmination. And so that's why way back in Daniel, we have those two visions. Daniel 2 of the image, Daniel 7 of the beasts. And that image in Daniel 2, we know it's successive empires, but it's one image. Because it's Gentile empires oppressing God's people, Israel, and then the New Testament church saints. And so it's a single image because they incorporate the previous empire, the evil of it, the gods of it, the rebellion against the true God and against his people. Their single God is Satan and themselves. And so each empire is new, but it brings into it the character of the previous empire. So that's why it's a single image. But in Daniel 7, it's different beasts because they are different. But the image shows they carry over qualities, evil qualities of the previous empire. I think what Luke 21:24 is talking about, Jerusalem will be trampled until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That will reach its peak when the Antichrist captures Jerusalem. He will be the final display of Gentile domination over Jerusalem. And he's going to have domination over it for 3.5 years. Because how does he gain domination over it? He breaks the covenant, sets up the abomination of desolation, and tries to drive the Jews out of Jerusalem and Israel. Why does he do this? Because Satan and the Antichrist, they know God's choices, his election, and he chose Jerusalem as the city of the great king, Psalm 48:2. But Revelation 11:8 says there's going to come a time, and I think it's that last 3.5 years, that he's going to be able to describe Jerusalem this way. Revelation 11:8. That great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Why does he call Jerusalem as bad as Sodom? Because when the Antichrist sets up that abomination of desolation, drives the Jews out as best he can, and he's in charge of the city that belongs to Christ, but now he feels like he has displaced Christ from his own city, and he's in charge, and therefore he's defeated God's promises about Jerusalem being the city of the great king, the holy city, God's city. But now this man of sin is fully in control of God's city. Until the seventh trumpet blows. And he's no longer going to be in charge of that city. The rightful owner, the rightful king, will come and capture that city. When that seventh trumpet sounds, God has the Gentile powers exactly where he wants them. At Jerusalem. He wants them there. That's why Zechariah 14:2 says, I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. Antichrist thinks he's the one doing all this with his own wisdom and power, and he's captured the city of Christ, and he thinks pretty highly of himself. I've defeated God. And God's up there laughing, according to Psalm number 2. God laughs at their plots, their schemes. And God has them exactly where he wants, because they're going to be right in the bullseye when Jesus comes back. Number 3, to bring the seed of the serpent, Genesis 3:15, to its final human expression. So we've talked about the mystery of iniquity. We've talked about the Gentile powers need to be brought to their final state. But now we need to talk about the man, the face of the mystery of iniquity. Because all through history, there's not just been Gentile empires, but there's been Gentile rulers, kings, dictators that are the face of those empires. Nebuchadnezzar, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, whoever you want to name, Cyrus the Great, the Medes and Persians. There's always been an antichrist figure as the face of that evil empire. And so this seed of the serpent of Genesis 3:15, those individual men, evil men, as the face of the evil empires, must also reach its final state. And we know him as the Antichrist, Satan's man on earth. So I want you to notice something in 2 Thessalonians 2. And we'll eventually get to 2 Thessalonians 2 and look at it in more detail. But I want you to notice in 2:3, there's the man of sin. Some of you have a footnote that says that word sin in some translations is lawlessness or iniquity. The man of sin is the man of iniquity. So let's call him the man of iniquity. Same thing, just a different word. So this is the man of iniquity. And then verse 7, you have the mystery of iniquity or lawlessness, some of our translations say. And I wish they would have translated them both the same, word, the man of lawlessness or the man of iniquity, and the mystery of lawlessness or mystery of iniquity, because otherwise it kind of confuses, I think, what Paul's trying to say. There's a mystery of iniquity, the system, and then there's the man of iniquity, the face, the individual ruler. And that also must come to a final state. And so we have verses like Daniel 7:25, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High. So the spirit of Satan, spirit of Lucifer is now in this man. That's what Lucifer did in the beginning. Daniel 11:36, he shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. Paul almost quotes this directly, 2 Thessalonians 2:4, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. How full is this man of himself? He captures the city, he's driving out the Jews, but that's not enough. I've stopped their sacrifices, I've stopped them from practicing but that's not enough. I want to march into their temple where they claim that their God is represented. They're trying to serve him during this time, but I've put a stop to that. I am going to set up the abomination of desolation, which is probably the false prophet causing the tech companies to build that image of the beast that speaks. Anyone who will not worship that image shall be killed. And so that's probably all part of the abomination of desolation idea. And he sits in that temple and declares himself God. That I've been able to do this over the last weeks or months, ever how long it's taken. And where is their God to stop me? Where is the Christian God that they claim is all powerful? No one has stopped me. I've been able to do everything I wanted. I'm the greatest human being ever. I'm the most powerful. In fact, I'm God. If you want to worship somebody as God, you must worship me, because there's been no God been able to stop me up to this point. So there must not even be another God. So I'll be it. That same spirit, prideful, rebellious spirit that was in Lucifer is in this man. And he's basically acting the same way. In Revelation 13:6, then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It's like he's standing in the temple, beating his chest, saying, here I am, God, what are you going to do about it? You've not been able to stop me yet. So I curse your name, I curse your people, I curse everything about your Bible, your nation, your son, whom you claim died on a cross. And here I am, I'm in charge. Well, then, not too long after that, the face of the mystery of godliness. And I've been bringing this up lately because I really love this picture. Hide us from the face of him. I saw heaven open and him on a white horse. You see, they're seeing all this before it's happening. So the face of the mystery of godliness is going to come down from heaven and crush the head of the man of sin. And he's going to be done with. But it's going to happen just before it happens. He's going to be thinking, all those promises that supposed God made in the Bible, I've been able to defeat him. He's not able to keep his promises. And at that moment, when heaven is open and Christ on his white horse, I love how Jordan Peterson puts some of these things in his lectures on the Bible, because it's so, the visual picture of this is so great. And so many of our stories and legends, every nation, every people group has had these same stories of a knight in shining armor on his white horse, slaying the dragon and rescuing the damsel in distress. Where do we think all those stories came from? The Bible. It's just their version of the Bible. That's exactly what happens. Jesus on his white horse, slaying the dragon, rescuing his bride. Usually there's like a mountain of gold involved, some great treasure, which that needs to be included too. And then the next one, to bring Satan's access to heaven to a close and cast him to the earth. This is maybe a bit more difficult for people to understand. So let's turn to Revelation 12, look at that. We say that Lucifer rebelled against God in the beginning, and him and a third of his angels were cast out. But it doesn't seem, and this is where the mystery is involved, because we're not told a whole lot about this, other than it doesn't appear that that was permanent. He still seems to have access to heaven, doesn't he? We know in the story of Job he did. We know in this particular passage, it speaks about the accuser of our brethren. Evidently, he has some power to still accuse us before God and cause us problems. And we don't quite understand what that means, and we don't quite understand how that looks in our daily life. But there's something very powerful that takes place when he's permanently evicted. That's different than now. That removes his ability to bring charges against us. So what does he do? He just attacks us directly. Instead of accusing us, now he's going to kill us. So Revelation 12:7, war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. So, so much about this story is past and future. And so there's kind of a mystery element to it. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So a permanent eviction is still yet future. And what all that means is we're just not told all the details. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So now he's confined to the earth, and he's quite upset about that, and he gains full and complete power over his man on earth. So he's no longer like kind of a distant, powerful, but still kind of a distant influence. Now it's kind of like, as I've used the word before, it's kind of an incarnation idea, where God became man in the person of Jesus. Now it's like Satan becomes a man in the person of the Antichrist. And this father-son kind of relationship is duplicated in some way. Because everything that Satan and the Antichrist does is an attempt, but a counterfeit attempt, an evil attempt, to duplicate everything about Christ and the Father. And so he has this death and resurrection event. Well, where did he get that idea from? So he's trying to imitate, to a large degree, everything about Christ. But interesting thing in verse 10, when he's cast out of heaven permanently, a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength, the kingdom of our God, the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night. So this has been going on the whole time. Has been cast down. So the heavens rejoice. Verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But the opposite to those on the earth. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows he has a short time. He knows enough about the Bible that he knows once this happens, it's going to come to term quickly. And so he's going to do as much damage as he can. And of course, in verse 17, the dragon was enraged with the woman because he knows enough to know that God's doing these things because of his ancient love for his people Israel and his love for his church that's still on the earth. So he went to make war with the rest of her offspring because the woman is protected in the wilderness. But those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, evidently, unfortunately, I guess we could say, we don't have that same protection. And so he's going to start slaughtering the saints. Even to the point of 13:7, it was granted to him. God allows it. That's hard to understand, isn't it? But God has a purpose in this. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, or at least it appears he's overcoming them because it's not going to be 100%. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. This cast out Satan, who deceives the whole world, that's 12:10. He then empowers the Antichrist in an almost incarnate way as a counterfeit father and son relationship. So 2 Thessalonians 2:9 says, the coming of the lawless one, the Antichrist, is according to the working of Satan. Then Revelation 13:2, the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. 13:4 says they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast. Even to the point, as I just read in 13:7, it looks like he's going to win. But the church is still here. That's 12:17 I just read. Those who keep the commandments of God have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And then the final one I want to deal with tonight, and this could be a whole lesson. I'm not going to take the time to go through Revelation 17 and 18. Another purpose of the last 7 years is for Mystery Babylon to be destroyed. Mystery Babylon, we would call Mystery Babylon maybe the religious arm of the mystery of iniquity, if you want to look at it that way. It has a religious component to it. It's false religion. It's opposed to the Bible. It's opposed to the truth of Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection and return. So it involves many religions, types of religions, and it's going to be destroyed. And 16:19 of Revelation, let's read that because that's kind of, it's the introduction to chapter 17 and 18. 16:19 says, now the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. It's an interesting statement. We are told that at least the U.S. and Russia, probably Israel too, probably other nations, China, India, and other nations too, Pakistan, you start naming them. Each of them have a nuclear missile, at least one, probably several nuclear missiles aimed at the major cities of the world, especially the major cities of their enemies. That may be one way that the nations of the what does it say? The cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Just read that last part and you'd hate for your name to be in front of that, huh? To give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. I mean, how many ways can you say it to conclude that's a bad thing? It's a bad deal. So we would say a purpose of the last 7 years is for false religion, evil governments to be judged harshly by God. And I might just add this because this in our day we've really seen this, the rise of this. So seems like swiftly and powerfully. One aspect of Mystery Babylon will be a focus of God's judgment against the rival false religion of Islam. Because in the next session, we'll talk about Israel and the church and the nations. But the three religions that claim heritage from Abraham, God's desire is to save one of them, Israel, to marry one of them, the church, Christianity, but then there's that third one. But there's nothing about them that it doesn't appear that God wants to spare. It is the rival religion that hates Judaism and hates Christianity. Even to the point where if you're living in a Muslim country and you hold to the other two religions, it may cost you your life just for holding beliefs of a different religion. Because Islam, one reason I think they're going to be a special focus of God's judgment is they deny God's election of Isaac and Jacob instead of Ishmael and Esau. So they're saying we don't accept God's choice. We deny it. In fact, we think that the correct choice is the opposite of what God chose. So there's not a lot about that system that should be salvaged, I guess. And the nations that came from Ishmael and Esau, and nations that in time, because you study the history of Islam, and those countries, one problem they had of competing against other empires is that they didn't have a common religion to hold them together. And Islam, a correct view of the history of it, was an invented religion of the Arab nations because they needed a system to tie together their separate nations to fight against their enemies. One way to do that is to have a common religion. So Islam was founded in the 7th century and spread all across the Arab countries first. It was invented by man as a rival against Judaism and Christianity. And the story has not yet been told. I've done a lot of research on this through the years, and it's hard to even find information. Even Christian writers have failed to, I think, grasp the enormity of it. For several centuries, Christianity, one of its strongholds was Northern Africa, all across Northern Africa. Hundreds and hundreds of Christian churches. Islam swept across Northern Africa and within about 50 years wiped them out, killed their people, destroyed their buildings, stole whatever treasures they had. And literally within less than 100 years, one of the strongholds of Christianity of Northern Africa was pretty much eliminated. Well, God's going to pay them back for stuff like that. It wasn't, let's conquer the countries and then let the two religions serve side by side. It's like, you accept our religion or you're dead. And God's going to make them pay for it. So those are 5 main purposes of the last 7 years. In next session, we'll deal with 6, 7, and 8, and there's a lot to say about those 3. Looking forward to getting into it. So we can stop the video, but I have been instructed to keep the audio going for a minute or so, right?
Right.
What we have found out is that when I turn the audio off, it cuts off